Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Balkan History Association's webinar series. I'm Timothy French, and joining us today is Dr. Ante Bralić, and his presentation is called The Symbolism of Signifiers in Historiography and Publicist Writings, the use of terms Slavi and Talijanaši in the Italian and Croatian examples. Dr. Bralić is a professor of history in the Department of History at the University of Zadar in Croatia, and he specializes in 19th and 20th century Croatian history, Italian-Croatian relations in the Adriatic, political violence, and historical demography. In today's webinar, Dr. Bralić will discuss how naming an ethnicity and later a nation is often more than a historiographical question. This issue is frequently shaped by political, ideological, and other factors rather than by conditions on the ground. During the period when the modern Italian, Croatian, and Slovenian nations had already formed, the terms Slavi and Talijanaši served distinct purposes. The former was used to justify Italian expansion into the eastern Adriatic, while the latter was used to deny the existence of autochthonous Italian nation. So, with that said, let us begin the webinar, and I will turn the floor over to Dr. Bralić. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your invitation. I am very glad that I can speak to you about this topic. This topic is created by my broader research of about this topic, and this is only part of that my work. It is simplified for this presentation. How to name an ethnicity and the later development of a nation is often not just a historiographical question. The complexity of this problem is more often related to the political, ideological, and other reasons than the actual situation of the ground. While writing my doctorate on Zadar during the First World War, I studied the literature of Italian inspiration of the eastern, dominantly Croatian coast under the Adriatic. This literature was written during the Great War, but also in the period between two world wars, and I noticed the problem of the use of term Slavi in Italian journalism and historiography, which provided ideological and historiographic justification for Italian domination of eastern coast of Adriatic. The use of term Slavi and Talijanaši in the period when the modern Italian, Croatian, Slovenian nation had already been formed was aimed to justify Italian conquest of the eastern Adriatic in the first case and denying the existence of Italian nation in the second case. The term Slavi denotes a semi-barbarian, politically and nationally amorphous mass that should be ruled by a higher Latin, that means Italian culture. The term Talijanaši was intended to show that there was no autochthonous Italian national community on the eastern coast of the Adriatic. In the Croatian and Slovenian cases, the term Talijanaši was abandoned at the end of the 20th century. It was only at the beginning of the 21st century that the Croatian and Slovenian names for the nation from the eastern coast of the Adriatic began to be used more widely within Italian historiography. The following works can serve as theoretical basis. That's work of Edward Said, Orientalism, Marija Todorova, Imagining the Balkans, and Nino Raspudić, Jadranski polu Orientalism. In English, that means Adriatic semi-Orientalisms. Edward Said's work, Orientalism, was originally published in 1979, and the Croatian edition was published in 1999. Said's work represents the cornerstone of post-colonial studies that have spread throughout the Western and mainly Anglo-American scientific milieu. By studying the interaction between dominant and the subordinate, Said noticed some common features. Colonial countries, by studying the world of subordinate countries, developed a system of thinking that to say that the ruling countries have a superior and more developed culture and civilization. As part of this, the study of the culture of subordinates serves to perpetuate mainly negative stereotypes about them, such as irrationality, impracticality, emotionality, and naivety. As Side states, this stereotyping leads to the orientalization of the Orient, which in this way became a set of simplified theses. However, on the other hand, subordinates also partially accept the negative stereotypes of the ruling nation. Even resistance to them is often motivated by the dominant culture, and they internalize such an orientalized Orient. Another book is Marija Todorova, Imagining the Balkans, originally published in 2008. Todorova also refers to Said, partially criticizing him. She creates a subtype of Orientalism called Balkanism, noting that the Balkans are not geographically so distant from the colonial and dominant European powers, and that throughout history they have been involved in some common process, also partially religiously similar, that mean of Christianity, as such different from, example, African countries. She creates an image of the broader semi-Orientalism. The Balkans, primarily referring to the countries that were under Ottoman rule, are also the source of numerous stereotypes of Westerners. The Balkans are an area of irrationality, emotionality, and as such inadequate to Western rationalism. All of the above was masterfully combined by Nino Raspudić in his work Adriatic Semi-Orientalism, published in 2010. Raspudić studying Italian literature over a wide time span, recognized the above-mentioned characteristic. Science, Croatian culture lived in continuous interaction with the dominant Italian, some form of knowledge development, and therefore he correctly believes that the classical type of Orientalism cannot be applied to the Eastern Adriatic area, and therefore uses the term semi-Orientalisms. He also considers the border Orientalisms, since these two worlds have been living as neighbors for more than 1,000 years. Raspudić clearly established that when Italian literature talk about Slavs, clear stereotypes are at work, whether the writer is sympathetic to them or despise them. In both cases, the Slavs are described as either infantile or unreasonably bloodthirsty. They are harmless to the point of childish naivety, but also, in the same circumstances, extremely corrupt. They are not capable of governing themselves, at least not in a rational Western way. First, I will talk about the term Talijanaši. There is, or rather there was, the term Talijanaši for the Italian inhabitants of the eastern Adriatic coast. In Croatian and former Yugoslav historiography, the term Talijanaši designates those members of the Italian National Corps who have Croatian or Slovenian, rarely Serbian, ethnic origin, and who as such are not so-called real Italians. In the political struggles of the second half of the 19th and first half of the 20th century, but also in historiography, it went so far as to deny the existence of Italians in Dalmatia, and the only real Italians could be settled the inhabitants of Kingdom of Italy, so-called Renicoli from Italian word. The pejorative use of term Talijanaši is visible in the works of the early Croatian historiography by authors such as Grga Novak or Šime Peričić. Also, Miroslav Krleža, an extremely influential Croatian left-wing writer during the communist Yugoslavia period, also played a major role in denying Italianism on the eastern coast of the Adriatic. However, as the relation between two countries calmed down, the use of the term decreased. It is a good thing that most of contemporary Croatian historiography avoids the use of this, in essence, pejorative term, and this does not represent a problem from the Croatian side today. Something about Italian publicist writing. The presentation selects small number of examples how Italian journalism and historiography are related to Dalmatia and a broader context to the eastern Adriatic coast over a period over 100 years. Their overview begins with First World War, when as part of defining Italy's war aspiration, the eastern Adriatic coast gained great importance. First is mentioned here is Arturo Galanti and work I diritti storici ed etnici dell'Italia sulla terra irredente. In English it will be historical and ethnical right to lands who are not recuperated by Italy, which was published in 1915. A time when Italy was formally neutral and the political scene was torn over the issue of entering the war and under what condition this should happen. In preparing the Italian public for the country entering the war, an attempt is made to highlight the Italianness of the provinces across the Adriatic. When discussing the Dalmatian issue, it is immediately pointed out at the beginning that the Austrian statistics are incorrect, because in that statistic, Austrian census of 1910, at that time only 18,000 Italian speakers lived in Dalmatia, while Galanti provides so-called real data. According to him, in Dalmatia out of 645,000 inhabitants, Italians number 60,000, and they are most educated segment of the population. The Slavs, numbering 480,000, consist of various types of Croats, Serbs, Morlak, Uskok, a small nucleus of Albanians, meaning the settlement of Zadar Banasi. The majority of these Slavi, how he called them, are peasant and in Italian singolarmente montanari, rozzi e ignoranti. That means they are from mountain, very stubborn, and they don't know lots of things. For whom Austria did nothing. According to Galanti, only 50,000 of Slavs are educated in a way that they can oppose to Italians. In Galanti, we find the often quoted historical narrative about the uninterrupted continuity of Latin and Italian civilization on the eastern coast of the Adriatic. He dates the settlement of the Slavs to the 7th century, but the cities remain Latin even further. The turning point came in 1860 and especially at 1866, when Austria encouraged Croats and Serbs to develop a national consciousness that had almost never existed before. As an incentive for occupation of Dalmatia in his war plans, Galanti predicted that there will be no problem with Slavic irredentism because the province will be separated from the hinterland and open to the sea and thus to Italian civilization, and that the inhabitants will eventually become Italians. The Italian representative Piero Foscari, in his work Salviamo la Dalmazia, in English Save the Dalmatia, published in 1915, published his speeches he gave on the issue of Dalmatia in the Italian parliament. In the introduction, it is claimed that the Italian element in Dalmatia was subjected to decades of persecution by the Austrian police. Now, Slavism is the enemy of Dalmatian Italianism. Foscari stated in his speeches that Dalmatia was not only important for Italy because of its Italianness, but also for geostrategic reasons, and that therefore Italy should have the area starting from northern Dalmatia all the way to the Neretva River. Alessandro Duddan, born in Split in Dalmatia, graduated in law from the University of Vienna, Throughout his life, he dealt with the issue of Italians in Dalmatia. In the work Dalmatia Italia, or in English Dalmatia in Italy, published in the Rome 1915, it can be said that he built an heredatistic narrative about Dalmatia in an idealistic manner. The very titles of the chapters of the book speak for themselves. Dalmazia è geograficamente terra italiana, Dalmazia nella storia e nella civiltà italiana, l'evasione Slavia e le città italiane, meaning that coastal Dalmatian cities are Italian, l'ininterrotta italianità della città dalmate, and so on. According to this narrative, the continuity of Latin and Italian culture, which is autochthonous while the Slavi are immigrants, is clearly emphasized. Austria wanted to destroy Orientalisms, and it handed over power to the Croatian citizenry, which was imported, and condefazione, that means disfigured, a very ugly word. Quoted, the Slavic rural masses, or rather those who speak the Slavic language, Croatian, he said, exist and constitute the majority of 650 inhabitants of the whole of Dalmatia. However, these are unconscious masses lacking national feeling. Today they follow the Austrian direction, and tomorrow, if Italy were turned to Dalmatia, they would follow the Italian one. But it will be difficult to follow the Serbian one because it is opposition to orthodoxy. Dudan, as an active participant in political process and in inter-ethnic struggles since the beginning of 20th century, in the territory of the Habsburg monarchy, should have been quite clear about process of nationalization of the masses in Dalmatia. During that period, the process of Croatian national integration was deeply massified, and his insistence of use of Slavs and Slavic have their roots in the ideological political association and not in reality. Something about Italian historians. Among the most cited works in Italian, but not only that language, is Giuseppe Praga, Storia di Dalmazia, or History of Dalmatia. The work is particularly popular among the Italian Ezel community and their organization. The historical account begins with migration of peoples and the other Slavic invasion that the Dalmatian Latinity survived. It is clear that Praga sees the existence of Italians in the 11th century in Dalmatia. Of course, from such a perspective, the development of Dalmatian history from his pen is clear. According to Praga, the higher, superior Italian culture since the 11th century gave rise to the lower, rural, more lucky, it's also sometimes synonym for Slavs. On the recent Italian historians, one of the better experts of the history of the Adriatic area is Egidio Ivetic or Ivetic, who, with the Istrian origin, connected both worlds. His latest book, which broadly describes the history of this area, is Povijest Jadrana, more i njegova civilizacija, published in 2022 on a translation of Italian original Storia dell'Adriatico, un mare la sua civiltà, in English, History of Adriatic, the sea and his civilization, from 2019. Unlike previous Italian historians, Ivetic has no problem naming the inhabitants of the Eastern Adriatic with Croatian and Slovenian names. In fact, the largest part of the study on the Eastern coast is devoted to the history of the Croats. In this long timeline of the Adriatic history, in his concluding part, he gave a rather vivid description of inter-ethnic conflicts. Quoted, the conflict between Italians and Croats from 1860 to 1945 along the Adriatic coast in Istria and Dalmatia was conflict between two competing nation buildings. The nationalization of masses in the Croatian and Italian key at the beginning of the 20th century was interdependent. The result of this almost century-long conflict was devastating for the Italian side. Ivetic finally noticed that in the Croatian and Slovenian context, it is emphasized that Adriatic history is marked by the colonial attitude of Venice and Italy, and by the general nationalistic and imperialistic tendency of Italian culture towards the Slavs. Next historian is Luciano Monzali. He is certainly one of the best experts of Croatian, South Slavic-Italian relation among contemporary Italian historians. He has devoted himself deeply to this relation in broader sense, from the 19th century to the end of 20th century. Monzali work, Italiani di Dalmazia dal Risorgimento alla Grande Guerra, or in English, Italians in Dalmatia from Risorgimento to Great War, is an example of new approach to the history of the Eastern Adriatic coast. In this work, Monzali uses both the Croatian and Serbian names for the population of Dalmatia, and when he speaks of Slavs, he refers to Czech, Poles, or South Slav in general. Of course, there's still widespread use of term Slavs for the population of Dalmatia in the third quarter of the 19th century. Also, the Italian national name is used without reservation. However, as the 20th century approached, Monzali increasingly uses the Croatian and Serbian names describing the South Slavic population of Dalmatia. Monzali wrote Gli Italiani di Dalmazia, la relazione italo-jugoslava nel Novecento, in English, Italian in Dalmatia, and relation between Yugoslavia and Italy in the 20th century, covers the period of up to the end of 20th century. It described the tragic clash of Croatian, Slovenian, and Italian conflicts on the eastern Adriatic coast, which ended with the emigration of most Italian from the said area. Looking for a reason why the contemporary Italian and Croatian publics are still distant and relations are quite cold, he finds the causes on the Italian and Croatian side. I quote it. However, bilateral, cultural, and political relation between Italians and Croats remain cold and rather static. Cultural affinities and a common history marked by strong symbiosis between two peoples are mostly ignored, and similarities are still little recognized. There are many causes. In contemporary Italy, we are witnessing the strengthening of provincialisms and cultural and political localism, which translate this into lack of interest in international life and in the history events of neighboring peoples. Furthermore, among Italians there is deep ignorance about who Croats are and what modern Croatia is. The perception of Croatian national specificity is rare. This is contributed by the limited spread of Croatian culture in Italy and the lack of promotion of Croatian language studies in Italian university. In fact, in the minds of many Italians, Yugoslavia still exists, and they prefer to deal with the complexity of national realities of Central and Eastern Europe in a simplified way using the term Slavi. Finally, stereotypes arising from the era of national struggles and conflict persist. In some parts of Italian public opinion, strongly ideologized perception of the history of Italian-Croatian relation remain as a legacy of the old imperialistic fascist nationalism and the rhetoric of the far left. In Croatia, however, an isolationistic and xenophobic Croatian national ideology continues to flourish among parts of the public and the ruling class. It denies or silences the Latin and Italian components of its identity and fosters distrust and alienation towards Italian culture and Italy, which are seen as potential threats. The old isolationist and centralist Croatian nationalism herited the prejudice and tradition of the most extreme Croatian national ideologies, and Titoist communism found new life and support in the struggle for independence and the war against the Serbs. It is rigid, rigid ideological nationalism that no longer meets the needs of Croatian society, which has had no enemies on the other side of the Adriatic for decades. And conclusion. The term Slavi, which does not have the same emotional charge today as did in the first half of 20th century. However, the term is still used today. The term Slavi, whose use I am questioning to describe the period after the second half of the 19th century, is used with an Italian and English-speaking world for the population of the Eastern Adriatic coast, almost exclusively for Croats and Serbs in Dalmatia and for Croats and Slovenians in Istria. The use of this term is modern or time is wrong for at least two reasons. The first reason why the use of this term is wrong is that it has pejorative meaning for the Adriatic Croats and Slovenes. Namely, within former Italian historiography and journalism, the use of term Croats and Slovenes for the inhabitants of Dalmatia and Istria was often deliberately avoided. The root of this term is in the Italian term Slavi for the inhabitants of Eastern Adriatic coast, which denotes a semi-barbaric amorphous mass that needs the leadership of higher Latin read, Italian culture and civilization. This mass is so amorphous that after 1,000 years of neighborhood, one cannot learn that there is ethnic group with Croatian name. It should be clearly emphasized here that Italian historiography and journalism have no problem using the name for other Slavic people such as Czech, Polish, Slovak, Russian, etc. The term Slavi in this time period is used exclusively for the Adriatic Croats and Slovenes. The second reason is that the process of Croatian and Serbian national integration in Dalmatia was largely completed even before First World War, which is evident from several indicators such as election for political bodies, primarily from the Imperial Council of Vienna, for which the principle of universal suffrage for men was applied, which clearly showed the political profiling of the population in Dalmatia, but also in the most of Istria. In addition, the expansion of cultural and sport organization, for example, Croatian Falcon, political organization, for example, Party of Rights, the choice of education in the Croatian language, up to the clear manifestation national feelings such as highlighting the national symbols, public parades, which also include inter-ethnic physical conflict, clearly indicate the development process of national integration. The use of terms Slavs and Slavic as such stage of development of national consciousness is deeply wrong because it does not reflect historical reality. However, we should end on a more optimistic note because quite relevant historiographers, I said about them, Ivetić and Monsali, have adopted the use of Croatian and Slovenian names for inhabitants of the eastern coast of the Adriatic, which gives hope for better mutual understanding between the inhabitants on both sides of our sea. And finally, we should quote the great Croatian writer Ante Matoš, who claims that, quote, "To know Italy, or at least to understand old Italy, means to understand a large part of Croatian intelligence and physics, means to know oneself." Thank you for your listening.
Thank you, Dr. Bralić, for that fascinating presentation, and thank you for the research that you have brought to us with this presentation. We will see if there's any questions from the audience now. I know I have a few myself, but if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand, and I will let you. I can unmute you, and you can speak, or if you want, you could even type your question in the chat session. So. One of the first questions I had, now I think you covered this. I was wondering if these terms like Slavi did they come from the bottom up, from the masses, or did they come from the top down? And I know particularly you mentioned during the Austrian Empire that it came from the bureaucracy and the clergy. So was this sort of a weaponized term used by government and intellectuals and people in authority?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. This is not bottom-up term because we have quite a lot of sources. People, for example, in Dalmatia, will call themselves Dalmatians, but there is one paradox in that situation. How they name their language, they use a Croatian name for language. That's some paradox. They didn't call themselves Croatian. I speak about process before a process of national integration. I speak about the beginning of 19th century. People didn't call themselves Slavs. This is creation of intelligence from a Renaissance period, from high culture. And it's transformed by Austrian government and cultural cycles for naming of Slavic people in all monarchy, and this is connected with the development of Slavistic, of new branch of science, especially in Vienna University, the beginning of 19th century, etc. People didn't call themselves Slavs. This is for sure.
Okay, and also I was wondering, so the term has been around a while, but does it go away and return during periods of, for instance, when borders are in question, such as at the end of World War I and end of World War II? Do we see the reemergence of the terminology during times of border conflict or border question? Is that the case?
Yes. That's true, because when a situation became much more tranquil after we established borders and the situation became more tranquil, it is precondition to development, I will say, normal names for nations, etc. During, of course, especially during the First World War, but during this research I found some texts from the Second World War. That narrative was really brutal. But I would say also from Croatian side during that period, that was also some very bad narrative about Italians in this area. But how I said in this presentation, Croatian side left that using that term much more before that Italian side.
Okay, thank you very much. Again, if there are any questions, feel free to raise your hand or type something in the chat. I have another question. It's a little bit sensitive, but I was wondering, we talked about World War I and World War II. During the Civil War of the 1990s, was there a reemergence of the use of any of these terms in Italy or Western Europe during the Yugoslav Civil War of the 1990s?
Italy and Italy public wasn't. They didn't use lots of energy to follow that. I stop it. What I research some aspect about Italian esuli. That what we call esuli are people who left, for example, Dalmatia and Istria and go to Italy. And that in Ethnic community during the war for independence of Croatia, there was a huge clash between two political or parties or political stances between through this community. Some of them calling all the what I call anti-Croatian sentiment, that say we shall cooperate with Serbs against Croats, but most of Italian as a community in fact supported Croats in that war by humanitarian aid and lots of another thing. There is also became predominant in that Azali community that they accepted Croatian name, they accepted Republic of Croatia, and in fact during the most first when war was in very in high tide in 1991, for example in Zadar, that was very cruel situation. In that moment is established Comunità Italiana di Zadar in Zadar. That means Italian community in Zadar. After 50 years in which Italian community for Italian community was forbidden to organize and something like that. But during that very cruel time, I repeat, it was established Italian community in Zadar, and they still exist today.
Okay, so I do not see any questions, so I guess we will wrap this up. Dr. Bralić, I was wondering if you have any closing thoughts or closing comments about your material, or where you're going with this, or anything you're working on?
Yes, this broader text of this will be published in one book. It is a book which will, I think, publish in these days. That will be broader text. I will send you connection for that text when that text will be published. Thank you for your calling, for your invitation, and I'm glad that I was today with you.
Well, thank you for your time, Dr. Bralić. It was an interesting conversation, interesting presentation. Much appreciated. And we would like to thank the Balkan History Association, and we would like to thank Dr. Mihai Dragnea for his work on this. So thanks to everyone who attended. Thank you, Dr. Bralić, and we will see you for our next webinar. You can check the Balkan History Association webpage or Facebook, and it will show you upcoming webinars. Thank you again.
Thank you.